channel after the event. So for some quick intros, my name is Jessica Archer, and I am part of the business development side of Unreal Engine for games. And today it is my immense honor to be up on stage here with some of the team from Crystal Dynamics. And they're going to be sharing with us about their move from a couple of decades in internal tech over to UE5, which was no small feat. We're going to kick off the discussion with a few questions that I have for them first, because someone gave me a microphone and now I'm up here unsupervised. So after that, we will open it up to questions from the audience. And most importantly, Crystal is here today to talk about the tech. They will not be answering any questions about current or future projects. So when it's time for questions from you, if you could be respectful of that and keep the conversation related to their experience moving to a new engine, we would greatly appreciate that. So if we could give them a nice warm welcome, we will then move into their introductions and start the discussion. All right, so.
I guess I'll go first. I'm Scott Stevens. I'm a tech director at Crystal. I've been there for 2 years now. And I actually came as an outsider for this because as a newcomer, I'd been in Unreal at other studios for about 5 or 6 years. So I was kind of a third-party observer to the process of the switch, and hopefully I was of some help.
My name's Alicia Thayer. I'm a lead technical designer at Crystal. I've been here for about 10 years, and I'll be representing content creation, prototyping, technical design.
Hi all, I'm Till Brenner. I'm one of the technical directors as well. I've been at Crystal for almost 13 years now, and you'll be hearing a lot about the technical side, our decision-making process, and the pain points that we went through. That's it.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melissa Reuter. I'm Technical Art Director here at Crystal. Been here for about 8 years now, and I'll be representing Tech Art's tools and pipelines, our materials, and also maybe a little bit about our environment team.
Awesome. I'm Ben Irving, Executive Producer here at Crystal. I've been at Crystal for about 2.5 years, so similar to Scott, kind of a newer addition to the team, had worked at studios on Unreal before as well, and joined right around the time we started talking about, hey, what if we move from our proprietary tech over to the Unreal Engine? So I can talk a bit more to the kind of strategic conversations we had or some of the production realities if you'll have questions about that. Back
Great.
to you, Jess.
Thank you. So we'll start off with the big question that everyone has, and that is, why did you switch from internal tech to UE5?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an obvious starting point, and I'll give a little bit of context, and then we can hand over to the team to kind of dive into some of the specifics that I'm sure is what you're all after. But you know, in Crystal's history, we actually had talked about moving to Unreal several times and decided to not do it. We decided to invest in our own tech and build up our engine. And so then the question becomes, well, what changed? What was different this time around? And I think a lot of that answer is just the difference in the industry. You know, the further time goes on, the more technical games are, the bigger games are, the more complicated it is, as well as the quality standards we put on ourselves for the games that we want to deliver continue to go up. And so we quickly got to the point of saying, you know, do we want to be a game team that builds engines, or do we want a game team that builds games? And we kind of sided with the passion for us, which is the game making, telling amazing stories in immersive worlds. That's the thing that we're really passionate about. And some of the production reality there was, and I'll use made up numbers just for the sake of it, you know, do you put 50 engineers on creating an engine, or do you take those 50 people and put the energy on creating the game? And ultimately for us, we wanted to put those people on making the game, and we felt like over time we wouldn't be able to keep up with other engines in the market, like Unreal. We did a long evaluation, and again, I'll hand off here in a second to talk about some of those details. But none of that was easy. There was it wasn't all a slam dunk. For example, Till and Scott will speak a bit to some of the engineering challenges. On the tech side, a lot of it we felt there were pros and cons, and we weren't sure. Whereas on the content creation side, design, art, etc. We felt like it was a slam dunk with the tools that Unreal has. And again, that's where the other team members can talk to that. And so it wasn't a slam dunk. I think we're all happy to have gone through it, but it certainly wasn't easy. And so if you're in that spot, you know, they're the kinds of questions we're happy to answer. We want to be super candid in the conversation. We want to share the positive things that have worked well for us, as well as the things that we're finding challenging. Jess has encouraged us, even though she's from Epic, to be as honest and candid as possible. And so we'd love to hear tough questions as well as easy questions from you all. But why don't I hand off, and we'll go to Till first to talk a little bit about, you know, the engineering challenges or discussions we had in the evaluation.
Sure thing. So one of the big things is the history of Crystal and how many years we've actually spent and invested in our proprietary engine called Foundation. At least 20 years, if I remember correctly. As I said, I've been there for 13 years. In those 13 years, we actually did 2 rewrites of the engine where we added major architectural changes. During one of them, we actually did do an evaluation of Unreal as well. And specifically, we were looking at Kismet at that time. And one of our visual scripting languages ended up being very, very similar to that concept. And we called it Action Graph at this point, not to be confused with Action Script, but Action Graph. So that's the 13 years there. We added a lot of tech. I personally spent a lot of time actually in the code writing new systems, and I had to give up my baby on this one. So this was definitely one of those, me as the engineer on this panel, I struggled a lot with this particular decision. So I'll hand it off to somebody else.
Yeah, I don't know if, Scott, you want to add just the flavor of being the engineer with Unreal experience coming into the team full of proprietary engine experience and like some of those conversations you had to have with the team.
Yeah, there was a lot of sort of reassuring that they would still have a job, that there's still plenty of engineering to be done, even when you're using Unreal, that there's no lack of technical work still to be done. It's also takes a little bit of a mind shift change that you know, when you're an engineer on Unreal, you might spend as much time researching the problem and seeing how it's done elsewhere in the engine as you will just implementing something, because you know, you want to know if it's already there implemented in the engine.
From a content creator's perspective, we ended up looking at a lot. I mean, I do a lot of like rapid prototyping and early gameplay exploration, in addition to supporting the designers with tools and things like that. So I felt like a kid in the candy store when we were doing our evaluation and deciding whether or not to change. Having Blueprint available to me in UMG, being able to make editor tools and runtime tools without needing to interface with code. These were things that we didn't have accessible to us in our previous engine. In addition, Sequencer. Till said we evaluated Unreal, 3 for Matinee back in the day, right? Like, basically from that point on, the design team and the content creators were begging for something like Matinee, so Sequencer, yeah, it was kind of like, hey, finally, and so we spent some time figuring out like the applications, whether it be cinematic or in gameplay for Sequencer, and basically every time we opened up a new tool, we just found infinite uses for it. So.
Yeah, and I think another thing, like from a TechArt perspective, even though we're doing a lot of tools and pipelines where we're not directly involved in the engine, like we do a lot of content creator support. And looking at Unreal, like it offers some really polished like UX, like right out of the box, which was really helpful because artists could either like just figure it out intuitively. There's tons of documentation that they can refer to. And a lot of content creators also learn how to use Unreal in school. So that translates to a little bit less support time for TechArt, and we can spend more time working on really cool things. So that was really nice.
There is an additional element, and this actually pains me as an engineer to say. I actually completely agree with our content creators that Unreal really makes it easy for people to actually work with those tools. In our prior engine, people were struggling. It was a really powerful engine, but you had to have PhD, for instance, in our physics
Okay,
system,
yeah,
right?
it was crazy powerful, but it was nuanced, right? Like, I mean, Till said it's like what, like 20 years old or something like that, right? So it's building on it since like Gex, you know, like forever ago. And we found that the ramp time to get someone familiar with our tools, it took a while, right? And the physics engine one, he brings that up because I bring it up a lot, right? Like it had real world values in it, right? And so if you didn't have a lot of experience in physics, for example, like you may not be able to intuit that a tunable needs to be 0.00001, for example, or something like that, right? So yeah, everything's very visual in Unreal. The whole blueprint is everything concept I'm a big fan of. It just means that you know I can learn one thing in one place and then apply it to everything else, and that's been very great.
And then speaking of the history there, speaking of Gex specifically, we had a unit. Our entire worlds were built with Gexels. And then one of those big reworks was actually purging Gexels out of the engine. And with Unreal, we just have centimeters and meters, and it's just a standard unit. So
It's the little things. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually another thing that we struggled with a little bit in Foundation, just because we've been going project to project. We've accumulated a lot in the engine, and at one point we tried to separate our content from our engine code, and that ended up being really difficult, actually. It was basically hard-coded in, so we ended up with a lot of old stuff in our newer games. Not ideal.
So we're gonna keep moving because I know it's easy to keep
I'm
talking.
sorry, really chatty, yeah.
Another question that I had was, how long did it take you to get up to speed for your teams?
Shall I give so we did some high-level stuff, and then I think if you'll speak to the specific things. So one of the things we did, and I don't know, there might be better ways to do it, but our approach was, let's take a 6-month initiative where we try to build something that's a playable experience, and we use that as what we called Unreal Learning or Unreal Training. I forget, whatever we called it. One of those two things. And the whole goal was like, this was an added part of the cycle of our project. It wasn't about hitting project-specific goals, but it was about teaching the team. And we started early on just with doing things like, oh, we'll just do the online learning courses and whatever. But we found that without trying to rally the team around a deliverable, we weren't like forcing groups to come together to build something playable, to learn a bunch of the harder lessons you don't learn until you're trying to actually do that. And so that was a thing that I think worked well for us. We had a playable thing at the end. It was themed to the kinds of games we're interested in building, as you can imagine, but it wasn't specific to the game we were trying to make at the time. But it helped rally the team into that. And one point I want to make before we hand off is like, we didn't think that we would become Unreal experts in 6 months. We just felt like that was about the amount of time our team needed to experiment, to learn, before we could go back to building the game. And I think it's probably fair to say everyone's still learning now, even though we're pretty deep into it, and we'll probably keep learning forever. I don't think you master it all necessarily. But that was just a dedicated, at least from like a production or team perspective, a dedicated amount of time we had to give our team some space to learn and adjust to a brand new engine.
So how's it going with the design and scripting, though?
So Alicia.
I can do that one. Yeah, so the design and scripting is interesting. Like I have to talk a little bit about we had a visual scripting language before, right? Blueprint is familiar. It's not a huge jump to go from one to the other. However, the readability of our old scripting language was a little less than Blueprint. That the execution pin concept, right? We didn't have that. So any output could trigger any input, which meant that you ended up with a lot of loop-de-doop scripts. But it was further abstracted from C++ than Blueprint is. And I think that it was more accessible to our designers and our content creators than Blueprint is. And so I am noticing on my team that for the less technical scripters, they are struggling a little bit with adopting Blueprint. It's a little scary for them, right? And they're needing more help and more time and more tutelage.
And Blueprint is definitely a lot closer to code than our previous visual scripting language. Think of it as Lego pieces. You have a lot more Lego pieces, whereas on our previous engine, we had pre-assembled Lego constructs that we could then assemble to be bigger pieces. However, again, as an engineer, I actually really like how close Blueprint is to code. And it is so easy to actually implement new nodes, new functionality, just by adding a certain type of macro or markup to the actual code. Whereas on Foundation, it was actually a thing. You had to write your own classes, and that would actually expose the functionality and then test it and all that kind of stuff. It is so much easier to do that in Unreal.
That's a really good segue into something I wanted to make sure that we covered on this talk, and that was so in our previous engine, we had a pretty big wall between content creators and engineers. And with Blueprint being more adjacent to C++, I'm finding that my relationship with my engineers is improving greatly. And I have one in particular that I work very closely with, and the way she and I work together is we set up kind of the code backbone for anything that we're working on. We extend blueprints from that, just like Epic recommends, right? But what it lets me do is it gets me little noodle places, right, to prototype in Blueprint and to play with new features. And then when I feel like it's what I want and I can represent what I want, I go back to her and say, hey, check this out. I think this is how we want to build this content. We'll review it together, and then she ports that to code, right? And we just do that at regular intervals, and it's beautiful, you know. And it's pretty much one of the best ways I've ever worked with engineers in my life, like in my career.
I guess those are the first 2 hot tips right there.
Right.
Number 1, set up your base class first, inherit your blueprint off of that, because that makes it so much easier than to actually transfer everything over to code. The other hot tip, if you haven't looked at it, redirectors, core redirectors, that's a really, really important concept. Look into it.
Was there much of a difference switching over to Unreal with like junior versus senior team members?
That's actually a really good point. Thank you. I noticed actually a really interesting correlation of seniority and how easy it was for people to switch over. The more junior engineers, especially engineers, they had a lot more experience either from school, or it was just they were a lot more comfortable in the switch. Our senior engineers, they actually struggled, myself included. We just struggled a little bit more trying to adapt to the new concepts that Unreal brought them.
But to be fair, like a lot of these people are fighting with like a decade of experience or a decade plus experience in a different engine, right? And our old engine, you know, like it was extremely powerful, but it does approach problems differently than Unreal does. And so the rewiring is really tough.
As I said, 12 years on an engine, I had to give up my baby there.
Cool. So anything else on that topic before we move?
Actually, probably a good topic here to cover then is how did we even, you actually said the 6 months worth of a training phase then, right? But we actually did have a phase even before that where we started evaluating the engine, and it was actually 3 months for the larger team and at least another 2 months before that where a really small core set of engineers and content creators were actually looking at,
I think that's right.
Unreal then. And one of the big things that we decided to do that, we actually listed over 90 topics, stack ranked them, actually weighted them to figure out, let's look at this from an engineering perspective. What are the pros? What are the cons? Some of the early or the highly stack ranked items were definitely our streaming system, but I think the top one was the multi-user workflow.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
And I think that's a perfect segue.
Yeah, so the pre-evaluation, right, was a little targeted effort of just a handful of experts, all dogpiling on a little project to test the waters with multi-user workflow. We were really afraid of that. Our old engine was really good at it. All of our assets were XML. Right? So our developers got really accustomed to be able to check something out, right? Keep it checked out for long periods of time, and then just kind of most of the time, merge it pretty seamlessly with someone else's work, right? I see some people chuckling. Yeah, it's because I say most of the time. We did have some experts in-house, right, who would help, you know, when things just totally blew up, you know. But the cool thing about having those be text-based is we were able to like jump in and open them up in a text editor, and we're like, oh, okay, this is what went wrong, you know, and then fix them by hand. So we were really worried about exclusive checkout, right, with a team culture that just does not jive with that, you know, and then not being able to merge. I will admit that in that eval period, it was tough. Like, we did stomp on each other a lot, but we learned that what that taught us really early was the value in architecting our content correctly, right? And compartmentalizing things, making things components, things like that, right? So it was a very good teaching experience, but we did like, that was a really valuable exercise for us because it started to challenge the assumptions that we had been using for a long, long time.
That's a great transition and start to the next question, which is, what can UE5 do that your engine could not, and vice versa?
Do you want to go first, Scott?
Sure. I hope I'm taking one's thunder here, but one of the bigger ones was animation previewing and being able to, tweak an animation and just view it right there. I think they had to go end to end to the target platform to see the actual tweak. So that, I mean, all those workflows like that were definitely advantages that Unreal had. A sequencer, obviously, we already mentioned that one.
There's also a whole bunch of other ones. The VFX system was another one. I would actually argue Blueprint is one of those in terms of how close it is to code, right? But
yeah, a whole bunch of really cool tech. So let's see, we got Nanite, we got Lumen, like Till mentioned, the VFX system, we got virtual textures. It's easy to add plugins, which you can talk about. Virtual shadow maps, like so many cool things right out of the box. So that was really awesome to take a step forward just by switching.
Validation.
Oh, validation and automation.
There you
Thank
go.
you. No, I absolutely adore the automated system and the automation system. We just didn't have any of that on Foundation. We tried a couple of times to build something like that. It just didn't work, but it just comes out of the box. There's a lot of work that goes into writing proper validation and writing proper automated systems, but the fact that the foundation is there makes it just so much easier and so much nicer to work with Unreal on that.
One thing I will say about the validation stuff too, because I've come to appreciate it even as a content creator, we got it set up really early, and we decided to just kind of go all in. We were just gonna okay, let's do this, right? It's the greatest teaching tool. Right? Like, our content creators are just naturally messaged when they mess something up, right? When they don't set up an asset right or something like that. And what it creates is a self-documenting tool, which is the best thing ever, because we all know you can, pour your heart out into Confluence, right? But like, if people don't know that those things are there, then your team isn't learning. So from a content creator's perspective, the validation, I mean, I get hit by the validator all the time, right? But it's great because it reminds me that like I'm creating problems for myself in the future and I should fix those before I check them in.
I mean, for sure, there's also just console support, and there's a whole bunch of work that we can now leave in Epic's hands to just take care of all the nuances of each platform. We know if it works, on PC, it's probably going to work plus or minus a little bit of tweaking on other platforms. That was one of the advantages for sure.
So what about some of the things that you miss now from Foundation, or that you're frustrated by with moving to Unreal?
So for me personally, I do kind of miss our material system that we had in Foundation. It was very, very powerful, but like we mentioned earlier, even though it was very powerful, it was sometimes a little hard to use. So I do miss that. I guess the two things specifically are, I think we had a little bit more control over the user-facing UI UX for our materials. So we could organize things in a way that our artists really liked. The other thing is the amount of modifications we were able to make as technical artists. Like, we could do a lot of things that we don't have access to in Unreal without making source code edits, which we want to be really careful about. So I do miss that a little bit, but there are other aspects of the material system that are great. So.
On the gameplay side, there's, I think we kind of underestimated the amount that that Epic leaves up to the team to decide about things like there's no class weapon, there's a very basic projectile, there's some very basic damage systems, but in terms of the kind of games Crystal tends to make, there's a lot of infrastructure that was built around those games in the old engine that we're, having to recreate. And it's appropriate that the engine leaves all those things up to you to decide, but as part of the switch, there's a lot of work in front of us in that space.
On the flip side, it does allow us to actually get rid of some of that cruft then as well. So for instance, our old inventory system, we rewrote that
A nice
I don't know how
reset
many
button.
times.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's a great reset button. One of the things that I actually really miss was our streaming system. The streaming system on the Foundation engine was really, really powerful. We were actually looking for equivalent workflows, so we had something called stream layers. They actually had built-in logic in terms of when they would actually stream in, when they would stream out. And then with UE5, we actually got our data layers in as well, right? And that is one of those really great one-for-one, almost one-for-one systems that really help us maintain the workflow and the way we were thinking about our games.
So, Alicia, I know you love blueprints so very much, but is there anything that they're not all the way there for you?
I love everything about it. The end.
Performance.
I haven't had hit. Okay, yeah, that performance I'm sure is an issue, which we'll get to. But it's the accessibility is the thing I'm struggling the most with, right? Like I am feeling on my team a need for like a layer of technical designers that sit, in between the engineers and the level designers and the content creators, just because a lot of them, like I was saying before, like there's a little bit of history here. When we switched, we really wanted to try to do things the Unreal way, the right way, and so that was the message to the team was do your research, take your time, try to figure out the right way to do things. But the weird flip side, the weird effect of that is that you combine that with the unfamiliarity of the tools, right? And you kind of get paralysis. And so, like I was saying earlier, with our less technical scripters, I find that a lot of them just kind of freeze up a little bit and go I'm not sure what the right thing is to do. Which is motivating me to try to make more helper function libraries or little macros for them, or even tutorial videos, things like that to ease that along. But that has not been as easy, and it's kind of fire and forget as our action graph visual scripting language was.
So I'll do a quick plug for support here. When your team members don't know what the right Unreal path is, what do you have them do now?
There's actually a couple of steps. One, talk to your Unreal experts if you have them on the team. It is so valuable. Ask often, ask frequently. And then on top of that, obviously rely on Epic. Post on UDN, post often, post frequently. Get those questions out there so that we can actually look at those answers and then implement it the right way.
Yeah, and UDN is for everyone. It doesn't need to be something that you hold off and only a few of the senior team members have access to. Add the whole teams, right? Because everyone's gonna have questions. So, anything else on that topic? Old engine versus new?
I think there's plenty, but I think we should open it up for everybody.
Yeah, so we got about 20 minutes left. So we will open it up to questions from the audience. There is a mic in the center aisle here. So if you have questions, again, not about any current or future projects, go ahead and fire away.
Hello. I was just curious, so y'all moved from Proprietary to UE5. What was the process of getting the rest of the team up to speed? Was it documentation, or did y'all have in-house workshop classes and such?
So there's a couple of things we did, just high level, and you'll dive in. So we definitely engaged with Unreal on a bunch of the training courses that they offer and went through that. We did a boot camp inside of our org for people that were brand new to UE, or even now new hires that come on board. So we had a flow they would go through depending on your discipline. That's go in and do this training course, and the output is build X, and X changes for whatever discipline you're from. So we did some boot camp stuff like that. That was just that core basic training stuff. As a project, we obviously did that 6-month thing that we talked about. But beyond that, do you all want to speak to specifics for engineers or design or tech art?
Part of the 6-month thing, one of the first things that I remember we did when we kicked it off is the discipline leads got together and created kind of kickoff pages for each discipline, of just like, okay, cool, here's various topics we need you to get familiar with, and then here's, you know, a handful of tutorials that you need to go through, right? But the most important thing, I think, that really solidified training in the early days when we like just started the transition was putting the entire team on a focused effort together, right? Like whether we kept that work or not, but getting everyone very product oriented so that we could kind of simulate like what production would be like, and not, you know, and not noodle on being stuck in learning mode, but actually trying to create something together.
And that is actually a side project that we still have, and it's still active in our Perforce server. And that is exactly where we send everybody who joins the company is going through the exact same steps in as well. For instance, for engineers, we actually have, think of it as a syllabus of here are, you know, the 10 items or so. Actually go into the engine, create an actor, create a component, create a plugin, et cetera, and then they actually have to go through. Even our Unreal experts have to go through it. They might be able to do it in 2 days, but a lot of the people then take about a week or week and a half to actually go through that process then.
Yeah, I think we're trying to do lots of little stuff as well. So I think a lot of us work from home still, and I think one of the advantages of doing that is we use Zoom a lot, and Zoom is great to record things. So we do like micro talks that are like 10-minute tutorial, or hey, here's a thing you might not know, or here's a reminder about a workflow, or hey, remember to do all these things before you check in, or whatever it might be. And they're just little 10-minute like things we do at our team meetings. We record them, post them in Slack, and I think instead of trying to overload with a lot of ongoing stuff, like for example, we experimented with let's do dedicated 2 hours of training every week, and it was not very successful after the first kind of 3 months. But the little 10-minute chunks seem to work really well because people will go watch those videos, digest it, and it can be like an important thing that's relevant to whatever we're doing, you know, at the time.
So for instance, we kicked that one off with a 5-minute talk about the reference viewer. Personally, my favorite tool completely. And that's just a 5-minute talk, give it to everybody, and that just kicked it off. Everybody is encouraged to actually share their knowledge then as well.
Cool. Then I've switched engines mid-project. Was this a mid-project transition, or was it before starting a new project?
So this was an early transition. Yeah, I think that getting into the specifics of that is tricky, but we swapped early.
Thank you guys so much.
Hello.
Hey.
So I think in my career I've gone through what you've been going through a bunch of time. I think at least 3. And I noticed the pattern in my case, which is always the same, which is the artists will rejoice and the programmers will resign. So have you noticed this as well?
Yes.
Are you a songwriter on the side? That was excellent.
I've been preparing for that. How many did you lose in a percentage?
How many what, sorry?
How many programmers did you lose in percentage?
Oh, yeah. So I think, like, if Till, do you want to speak to, like, what was it like for the old guard that were hesitant to transition to Unreal?
It was tough. I'm being very, very honest there. It was very, very tough. Actual engineers that we lost on the team itself is actually 0. However, we did lose some of our really, really close friends in a co-dev partner that we really enjoyed working with them. On the flip side, we did gain a lot more expertise and new friends with other co-dev partners that have a lot more Unreal experience in as well.
So real quick, did anyone say they were going to leave?
Yes.
But they didn't.
They did not.
Woo.
We did also, I mean, to be fair, like, Till, you put a lot of effort into, like, how, like, we would identify people that we thought were high risk and say, like, how do we figure out projects for these people that are engaging? For example, if they were doing work that maybe mirrored stuff that Unreal gives you for free, well, what are other difficult problems that we can give them to push the game forward? And so you put a lot of energy into that. I think that helped with that, which was great. So that was a tip and trick we had on our list to share.
Yeah, and I think we noticed that a little bit for tech art too. And actually going through the process of the evaluation was really helpful because instead of like being afraid that, oh no, like all of the work is already done, like we listed out very specifically, like this is what we need to move forward. And realized like, okay, there are actually some very cool things that we can still work on. And we can even, like, since the boilerplate stuff is done, focus on the stuff that we're actually really passionate about. So that's been really exciting for the tech art team to focus on those types of like future looking projects. And then like we didn't reduce our tech art team size, like we've actually doubled. So
It is, however, a really good point. Our core tech engineers were the ones that suffered the most because previously they actually owned core elements of the engine, whereas now a lot of that stuff is just provided, and they fell into that, well, what do I do now? Right, and that is absolutely to Ben's point. We had to look really, really hard to find those meaty projects, some R&D work that really sparked their interest in as well.
Do you expect any reassignment in the future?
Do we expect people to resign in the future?
Let's say specifically because of the moving Unreal, because maybe not now, but let's say in 6 months when you start making the game and they will start notice that they're pretty much just making profile optimization and memory tweaking.
So my personal take is I think we're beyond that being the reason. I think at this point, we transitioned 15 months ago. Like, I think it's been long enough that at this point it's about general happiness on the project, and people that leave, it's probably not going to be Unreal. I mean, I think it's possible that some people do. I think that's not a hot topic for us when we talk about how do we make our team happy? How do we retain people? Like Unreal has stopped being a subject. It's more about how do we make sure everybody has meaningful work.
That's cool. You've been extremely lucky. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
One more thing on that one. You will need engineers for optimization, guaranteed.
Can you talk to your build pipelines, DevOps, asset processing, all that? So what was that like?
Thank you so much for that question because that is a fantastic topic. Hot tip, invest in your pipeline early on. Get that stood up, get your build pipeline ready to go. It ties into automation. It ties into the DDC cache as well. It ties into actually making builds. It ties into when you're making engine upgrades, you can actually automate a whole bunch of stuff with it. Speaking of, invest in automation then as well. Invest in your validation. Your build system will be able to run that validation as well. We chose to go with a Jenkins-based build system. It does allow it. We had a previous build system. This was a perfect time to actually do this switch. So if you're thinking about that, do that switch at the same time. I know there's actually Horde in the code, which is wink, wink, question, question. When is it actually going to come out?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Hi, thank you for all the insights. It's really nice to hear all of that. I was curious if you're comfortable sharing, is there like a missing piece of the engine that you decided maybe to rewrite completely, a feature that already existed, or something that's a huge tech investment that you say we really need this feature that's currently not there? You've discussed a bit about it, but
I have the perfect guy here.
Yeah,
for that.
yeah. So early on in that evaluation and even beyond that, we prototyped a lot on the character movement component that comes with Unreal. We know it's very integrated with the rest of the character pawn. Like there's a whole bunch of code around it, but we were finding that for the games we want to make with a lot of advanced movement modes and things like that, it was not built for that, for any kind of data-driven, that custom move mode kind of things are cumbersome and engineering heavy to do, and we didn't want that to be our workflow. So that is one of the big investments we're making, and it, we tried to do it in such a way that it's still technically an extension, and we're just kind of slowly migrating more of the code into our code, but it's still functionally equivalent, except that we can do more. But it's one of those things. It's like that's the important part of the games we make. So we felt like that was one of the big bets to make, and it's been a journey for sure to get to the point where we're starting to be happy with it. But I think in the long term it'll pay off because it's what's important for our game.
But I can't reiterate this enough. Do it the Unreal way first.
Yep.
This is
Which
actually
we
our
did.
motto.
We did that. Yep.
Do it the Unreal way first, only then see how you can modify the code, and only then actually make that choice to rewrite or write something completely new.
All right, thank you.
Hi, related question actually. So were you able to port any gameplay systems from Foundation Engine to Unreal Engine like easily, or was it rewriting most of the things?
Definitely been rewriting more so. There's been a few things where we'll have the foundation code up side by side and take inspiration from if it's a specific algorithm that we know we want, pretty one for one. But for the most part, you know, they spoke to the many years that were invested in foundation. There's enough cruft in there that we didn't want to just take something one for one. We could have just, like almost all the game systems, we could have just ignored Unreal completely and thrown those in there, and I don't think we would have been better off. We would have been just fighting the engine. We wouldn't have had the same blueprint and you know, all the property sheet integration and all that kind of stuff. So
there are a few very self-contained systems that we can do that with, but for a lot of the gameplay stuff itself, we just don't see it. It's too much of a risk to actually try to port our old code into Unreal.
Right, right. Another related question. So let's say you had, let's say the weapon system, inventory system that you want to remake. Could you estimate how long it would take in Unreal, or that was like a new world, so you can't really estimate just because you have the old system?
We definitely underestimated how long it would take, that's for
yeah,
sure.
on the gameplay side.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
But there are certain other ones. Reset button, the inventory system was so complex, as you mentioned it. We just decided, you know what? It's a bag of holding. Let's keep it really simple and then build on top of that then.
Okay, thank you.
In regards to debugging, with your old engine and new engine, were there any tools that you had to either relearn or adapt to, or maybe even rebuild in the new engine? And more specifically, for a newer developer, are there any tools that helped y'all a lot with debugging that you would like to bring attention to?
I guess the biggest thing is that the editor is the game, right? So again, we use Visual Studio for debugging all of our stuff, right? But one of the big lessons for a lot of the engineers was you will actually have to restart the editor most of the times, not always. There's some new tech, which is really exciting, but you would have to actually restart the editor when you're recompiling. And that was a big shift for us then, where we could just keep the editor running and then start the game somewhere else with Visual Studio, and those two were not coupled. Other tools, honestly, Unreal comes with a lot of debugging tools that are really, really helpful, but occasionally you do need to drop down to a little bit more low-level tools, such as, for instance, picks or something like that when you're trying to do a little bit more detailed optimization work then.
We do invest a lot, and I would recommend in debug tools like in Plain Editor or on platform that there's a, you know, you make your own interface and you know, show what's going on. That carries over one-to-one on any engine that you'd want to invest in that.
Exactly. CVARs are great, but there is that extra little layer that that you can put on top to actually visualize a lot of stuff than either in Plain Editor or in the game in general.
Thanks.
Hi. Considering Unreal is getting more and more companies, did you evaluate the risk of not having the ownership of the technology for the future, like relying on Epic, which is going wider and wider in different tech, like doing his own audio tech, physics tech, rigging tech, animation tech, etc. So, did you evaluate that?
Yes, we did. So you make a really, really good point here, actually. There is a certain risk when you're switching to Unreal that you might be working on some code, on some tech that Unreal might or Epic might just replace with, here is a completely new, out of the box, here's ready to go, and you've just invested 2 years in writing that, and you're like, oh, but it's painful on one hand, so you will run that risk. But it's also important to keep in mind that Epic is making a general purpose engine, right? So they're targeting systems that everybody wants to use, right? Whereas for your game then specifically, you can take a look at what are the things that will differentiate this game in particular from everybody else. And that is where we're trying to put our chips.
Thanks.
Hi. So sorry, you mentioned about it's worth to have the build systems and all of this infrastructure day one in there. As we're in similar position now, what advice would you give for other similar things? Like, okay, day one, take care of this because it's really going to pay off for you in the long run.
Set your naming convention. Set that one up, make sure that you have it, and then you can actually build validation on top of it.
No, you all laugh, but it's totally true, right? Like, so one thing that we do is like, it's as part of our feature development, we now require like whoever's making that feature, whether it be a technical designer or an engineer or what have you, like set up your naming convention and add it to the validator, you know, before you pass a certain sort of like checkpoint in your feature development. Like, it's way worth it because like if you don't and you don't do that early, right, you're going to end up with an entire database of, you know, misnamed like weirdo assets, right, that you can't track and you can't parse, like, and it's just, that's been so healthy for our team, and it's such a small thing, right, you know, but like it's been a really great cultural shift to empower people to create their own naming conventions, and then have this little thing, you know, that runs every time they try to submit, enforce that.
We've also gotten a lot of mileage out of, we made an experimental folder, and so while the engineers are kind of still working on best practices or writing core systems, you know, we wanted, at their insistence, to give the designers and the content creators a place where they could experiment as well. And you know, we didn't know exactly how we wanted them to do stuff, but they still wanted to experiment and improve out the ideas. So we made an experimental folder, and so the blueprints and the assets that are in there are known to be not vetted by engineers. And some of it, you know, I'm sure will be just fine, and some of it will say, yeah, we definitely want to nativize that, or provide a different model, but it's given the team more freedom to, you know, experiment while the engineers are comfortable knowing that we're not going to ship with whatever.
And we can add
Excellent work.
validators and to actually catch any of that content sneaking into the real levels. And
Well, I mean, but the experimental folder is designed to be allowed to sneak into the real levels, right? Like, don't look at me like that. It is, right? Like, but the idea is that it's often a little spot where it can be tracked, isolated, you know, all of those things. And so that's been really valuable I know these two are looking at me right now with like burning eyes, but like it's been really valuable I need space to experiment and play and find fun, you know, and noodle. And I get the freedom to do that in these spaces and make sure that, like, you know, I earmark one of these guys and say, hey, I did this thing, it's over here. We just kind of add it to the list of things to audit. So it's been very empowering.
But the nice thing is it can be audited. It's not
Yes.
just anywhere. So literally just having that one folder makes that a lot easier then.
Yeah, and also like with the separate folder, we can do like different levels of validation checks for that versus our production content, and also the developer folders too. So all of those can have like totally different levels of validation depending on where we are, and we can change that at any time.
Oh, but back to your original question, one more we haven't mentioned yet is UGS and the metadata server that provides little badges so that each change list you see in there tells you which jobs completed successfully. I mean, a lot of, besides the validation and the automation, the build systems, surfacing the status of them in a convenient and helpful way to content creators, engineers, whoever, has been an ongoing effort.
Scott, what is UGS?
Unreal Game Sync. It's a tool provided straight from Epic, but it's not part of the normal engine build. It's outside of the engine.
So 2 hot tips then as well. On our previous engine, we always relied on a nightly build and sync with Unreal. Encourage your team, sync often. Sync throughout the day. It's okay, just sync, sync, sync. It's fine, right? Whereas with the previous one, we had problems with that. Don't do it, but now go for it.
We have about 90 seconds, Jess. I don't know how many questions we can get. One more? What would you?
Maybe 1 or 2 more. Depends on how good of a question.
We'll try to
it
give
is,
brief
but,
answers.
We'll try, sorry.
We'll do our best.
We'll be brief.
All right. Was your past engine garbage collected, and were there any challenges transitioning to Unreal's system?
It was not garbage collected, so a lot of, and that's actually a really good point. The patterns that we use because of that are biting us in a little bit right now because the engineers have to rethink how to approach that. Now, that being said, just because you have a garbage collector doesn't mean that it's free. You are going to run into issues with performance or optimizations that are actually caused by the garbage collector. You'll see spikes.
I'm going to build on that real quick. Was there any misconceptions about moving to Unreal that you have since learned?
I like to joke about the fact that it's not really C++, it's more like C+++, because there's a lot of macros, there's a lot of markup that you actually add that a lot of our senior engineers were just straight up not used to.
No templates on UObjects.
No multiple
Feature
inheritance.
request. Okay.
Last question.
So just to go back to automation, sorry. You said there's a lot of automation. Do you mean using UAT, Unreal Automation Tool? And if yes, we've talked about linting, validation, things like this. Is there anything exotic that you guys are doing that would be valuable for us to know as one of the...
Yes, so it is UAT, or you're using Buildcraft as well. One of the things that we wrote early on is a size map job. So you know how you have the reference viewer and a size map in the editor itself, so you can take a look at your asset, see how big it actually is on disk or in memory, and that helps you then doing optimizations or checking where is all my memory going, right? But the one thing that we didn't see was, all right, so tell me about every asset that you have. So that was one of our very first jobs that we wrote. Let's just run this. It takes about half an hour or something like that for us to run. Actually, no, a little bit longer at this point, where it literally just goes asset by asset and actually creates a list of this is how much it will pull in. And that's actually another really good point. Watch your dependencies. Absolutely watch your dependencies, because that is going to come back and bite us. That's really what's happening right now, where we really need to be careful about those.
Thank you all for your questions. That was really, really good content. I know we're right at the end here, but I believe, Ben, you had one more thing that you wanted to cover.
Yeah, so really quick plug. This talk was entitled Taking the Heroic Leap from a Proprietary Engine to UE5. And if you would like to join us, oh, come on, really? If you would like to join us, if you would like to join us.
It's not me. Someone else is pushing a button. Oh, you have the thing.
Wait, can
I'm
you push
sorry.
F5, please? If you would like to join us on that heroic journey, we're hiring. And there's a slide that says that.
There it is.
Hey, round of applause. That was
heroic. I just wanted to make him feel nervous real quick.
But we are hiring some key roles. If you're interested, please come up and talk to us. If you know friends who could be interested, please direct them this way. We're looking for some talented people to join us. So other than that, thank you all very much for coming.
All right, and a big thank you again to everyone who joined us on the panel and the live stream. And I also wanted to say a special thank you to Scott Amos at Crystal and the whole team who allowed us to have them here today to do this. So thank you.
Thank you, Jess. And we'll be hanging up out front. If you want to chat some more, we'll be around for 10, 15 minutes. Thank you.